I'd like to introduce Dr. William Harvey, Vice President and Chief Officer for Diversity and Equity at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. He will serve as our facilitator for this morning's plenary session, which will feature our Spingarn medalists and will talk about the accomplishments of the NAACP as we move into our second century. Dr. Harvey.
Good morning. Thank you so much for attending this very, very special session of the NAACP conference, and we're very pleased to have you here. As you know, we have a group of people here who are luminaries in a variety of fields. Mr. Morial already stole my introduction when he identified them as a community of giants. But we want to have a chance to have a conversation with them today to hear from them about some of their own observations and some of their involvements with the NAACP over this last 100 years. These are all winners of the Spingarn Medal, which is the highest award that is given by the NAACP. It's a gold medal. It's awarded annually for the highest or noblest achievement by an African American during the preceding year or years, not just in civil rights, but in the whole range of human endeavors. And apart from the distinguished individuals who are on the stage, some of the other previous prize winners, you will certainly know their names, such as James Weldon Johnson, Carter G. Woodson, W.E.B. Du Bois, Jackie Robinson, Marian Anderson, Paul Robeson, Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, Ralph Bunche, Dr. Benjamin Mays, Oprah Winfrey, and Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. So clearly, this award has been given to people who are luminaries in terms of a variety of fields and in terms of making very significant accomplishments both to American society and to the world. We have with us today a collection of previous recipients of the Spingarn Award, and I'd like to give a very brief introduction to them, and then we'd like to move into the conversation stage. The introductions are not in order, though many of these people you will already recognize by face, but as I call them out, I'd just like for them to identify themselves. Let me first speak to 5 representatives of the Little Rock Nine. A name that's often associated with the Little Rock Nine is Mrs. Daisy Bates, and there may be some of us who don't realize that Mrs. Bates was not, in fact, a student who participated in the desegregation of Little Rock schools. She was the president of the NAACP branch in Little Rock at the time that this activity occurred. So we have with us today 5 of the original 9 participants who are identified as the Little Rock Nine. They are Mr. Ernest Green, Ms. Carlotta Lanier, Mr. Terrence Roberts, Mr. Jefferson Thomas, and Ms. Minnie Jean Brown Trickey. Just to provide the briefest of background and context here, these individuals are recipients of the 43rd Spingarn Medal awarded in 1958. They, of course, desegregated Little Rock Central High School in 1957, which had been previously an all-white high school. There was a little resistance when they tried to do that. In fact, a mob of irate white citizens formed, and Governor Orville Faubus, who was the governor of Arkansas at that point in time, called out the Arkansas National Guard in order to prevent them from desegregating the high school. Fortunately, President Dwight Eisenhower overruled Governor Faubus, called out the 101st Airborne Division, and they in turn went to Little Rock, escorted these young people to the school, and the rest, as they say, is history. The 63rd recipient of the Spingarn Award in 1979 is a gentleman by the name of Andrew Jackson Young. Mr. Young, of course, has worn many hats in his career. He is known in many respects most originally as perhaps in his ministerial capacity. He is, of course, an ordained minister, but he's also served as mayor of Atlanta, as a member of the U.S. Congress, as ambassador to the United Nations, and again, he is the 63rd recipient of the Spingarn Award. Reverend. The 71st recipient of the Spingarn Award is Dr. Benjamin Hooks, who received the award in 1986. Dr. Hooks, of course, has special claim to the NAACP as one of its own. In addition to being a judge and Baptist minister, he served as executive director of the NAACP from 1977 to 1992. He also, among his many distinguished honors, was appointed to serve as a commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission by President Richard Nixon. He was the first African American to ever hold that post. Reverend Hooks. The 74th recipient of the Spingarn Award in 1989 is the Reverend Jesse Jackson, Sr. Reverend Jackson, of course, also has worn many hats during his long and distinguished career. He, of course, is a clergyman. He is a civil rights activist, as we all know, and the founder of Operation Rainbow Push. And lest we forget, he was a candidate for the Democratic nominee for president in 1984 and 1988. The 75th recipient of the Spingarn Award in 1990 is a gentleman named Lawrence Wilder, known many of us as Doug Wilder. Doug Wilder was the first African-American state senator in Virginia since Reconstruction, the first African-American to be elected to statewide office in Virginia when he assumed the position of lieutenant governor in 1985, and the first African-American to be elected as governor of a southern state, 1990 to 1994. The 76th recipient of the Spingarn Award in 1991 is General Colin Powell. General Powell, of course, first received public acclamation in his role in the military when he was elevated to four-star general status, later became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and more recently has served as Secretary of State from 2001 to 2005. In 1993, the 78th recipient of the Spingarn Award was Dr. Dorothy Height. Dr. Hyde, of course, served as the president of the National Congress of Negro Women from 1957 to 1997. She has provided counsel to numerous policymakers, including Eleanor Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And in 2004, she was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by President George W. Bush. The 86th recipient of the Spingarn Award in 2001 is Mr. Vernon Jordan. Mr. Jordan, of course, also has close ties to the NAACP. He served as the field director in the state of Georgia prior to moving from that position to serve as executive director of United Negro College Fund, and ultimately to serve as president of the National Urban League from 1971 to 1981. And last but not least, a gentleman who's already been recognized this morning with some of the previous comments that have been made, Congressman John Conyers. The 92nd recipient of the Spingarn Medal, Congressman Conyers, received the award in 2007. He has represented Detroit in Congress for more than 40 years. He's a well-known and well-respected champion and voice of racial and ethnic minorities, women, children, the disabled, and veterans, and he is the first African-American chair of the House Judiciary Committee. So there, ladies and gentlemen, is our distinguished lineup. These are the giants that have been previously referred to. And even before we move into the conversation stage, I think that given their summary of extraordinary accomplishments and contributions to America and to the world, they deserve a standing ovation right now. What we'd like to find out from our panelists today is their sense and their feeling about the major accomplishments of the NAACP over these past 100 years, their own personal connections and feelings for the NAACP, and of course their sense of where we might be going in the future and what role the NAACP plays in plotting that future. So let's go all the way back, if we can, to start with the individuals who collectively received the 43rd Spingarn Medal. These are the individuals who are part of the Little Rock Nine. And can we ask you, any of you who are part, the 5 members of that group, can you give us a sense of the role that the NAACP played in Little Rock and your efforts to desegregate Central High School? And specifically, your sense of how the NAACP served not only in that particular situation, but in others since then to improve the situation for African Americans in the United States.
Well, that's asking a lot in one question, but I think we can say without doubt that the 9 of us, I think for them, owe a huge debt of gratitude to the NAACP. They were there pushing, nurturing, providing sustenance for us as a group, in the person of Daisy Bates, of course, but also in the presence of our attorneys, Wiley Branton and Thurgood Marshall, who did tremendous work. I think one of the things that I'd also like to say is to thank you for the members who offered prayers for us during that time in 1957, and some of you are here, and without those prayers, we would not have made it, I assure you. The work of the NAACP has been tenacious through the years and continues to be so, not because of habit, but because of need. We continue to face a tremendous need. I was asked a question recently by a young high school student. He said, well, since '57, have you been involved in the civil rights movement? And I think his understanding of that was somewhat truncated. And I said, young man, the civil rights movement began in 1619 and continues unabated. And so for all of us, as we consider the future, we have to understand that we must be supporters of the NAACP because we can't do it alone. And we have an organization who is dedicated to improving the lives, not only for black people, that's often a mistake, but for all Americans, because we have that kind of vision. Thank you.
Yeah, I would simply like to add that my first remembrance in Little Rock was of Reverend Crenshaw, who was president of the Little Rock branch, and he was always collecting memberships. I think they were $1 or $5 at that time. And that our parents were members of the NAACP in 1957, 1956, 1955, when Daisy Bates and the NAA instituted that court challenge so that the 54 decision of all deliberate speed would have some meaning. For all of us, it was those giants, those people who don't get recognized at this point, our parents, Reverend Crenshaw, others who made up the Little Rock branch and the Arkansas state branches, who had the courage to step forward and had a vision, as Terrence said, of what this country could be, and were willing to fight for it, and we owe them a great debt of gratitude.
I go back a little bit further with the NAACP with the fact that Thurgood Marshall had represented some teachers there in Little Rock, and one of those teachers happened to be an uncle of mine. And that was so that they could continue to work. They were asked to sign a loyalty card, which they refused to do. And with that work of Thurgood Marshall during the 40s, it carried on during our time. He really became one of my heroes, just watching him work within that court. And if it had not been for him and Wally Branton, I question whether we would have gotten in school any sooner. In fact, I know we wouldn't have gotten in school any sooner, being out of school there for 3 weeks. But it was with that work of Thurgood Marshall that really pushed our situation to the point that the President of the United States had to make a statement, and that statement was the 101st Airborne. I also like to thank Dr. Hooks for being a part of that group of, for the NAACP to meet in Little Rock in 1987. That was our first time for the 9 of us to get back together again. We had not seen each other in 30 years as a group. And the NAACP held their fall meeting in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I'd like to thank him for that effort.
I think my colleagues have said pretty much everything, but I'd like to just remember when we received the Spingarn Medal, and I think it was one of the most amazing experiences I'd ever had. But now I'm sitting with this group and I'm saying, wow, we were really important when we were 15 to 16 years old. And it's a wonderful thought, but I'm hoping, and I think that if I were to talk about what we as a Little Rock 9 represent and what we would hope to impart to all audiences, is that teenagers think deeply, have great ideas, want change, and that we have to support them. So I'm really honored to be on this stage because I really know how important I am now, but but I do hope that we can continue, the NAACP can continue to help young people develop their potential, their capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to just briefly tell you something about the NAACP in my life. As a young kid, I always wanted to be actively involved in the civil rights movement. I'm the youngest of 8 children, and my older brothers and sisters were out there trying and doing things, but my mother and father would not permit me because I was too little. And they were afraid that we might go to jail. My mother told me, if I do anything and end up in jail, don't call her. So I steered away from anything that just might be a cause to get arrested. When Wiley Branton and Thurgood Marshall went to court, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and they fought and made integrated schools in Little Rock legal, I really jumped it. That was a blessing to a prayer. Now I can legally go to Central High School and not be arrested. And the NAACP has been doing legal things for me, ever since.
I was passed a note that suggests that there may be a little bit difficulty hearing, particularly in the back. And that may be because of the amplification, or it may be that there are some quiet, not so quiet conversations going on in the room as well. So we would ask you please to refrain from dialogue while that's happening. The 5 of you and the 9 people that you represent, in effect, became symbols, but I think you would agree with me that there were a tremendous number of people who were working behind the scenes to make sure that your quest was successful. And I've learned from my friend and mentor, Julian Bond, and when he talks about his involvement in the civil rights movement, there are countless men and women whose names we don't know, who were extraordinarily helpful and important in helping to move the civil rights movement forward. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to direct a question to Dr. Height, because I'd like to hear from her observations particularly about the role that women have played in moving the NAACP forward.
Thank you. When we were asked to say something about some of the achievements of the NAACP,
She's wired. Let me take that from her, because I think they can hear you without this. Please go ahead and speak.
what'd you say?
Please go ahead and speak. They can hear you. Go ahead, Ms. Height. Dr. Height. Go right ahead and speak.
When we were asked to say something of the achievements of the NAACP, and I thought back about the spin yard experience, I have to say that I was not only honored, but I was challenged. And today, I would like to say something about an experience of the NAACP that did not achieve its full goals, but made a deep impression on the life of this country and on my life. And that was the anti-lynching campaign. I was a student in high school. I won an Elks oratorical contest on the Constitution of the United States. And I went to New York University with the scholarship that I won in that contest. And when I got to New York, having been active in my church and in many of the women's art circles, and particularly the girls' clubs, I was seeking for something that connected me not only to my studies, but to what I was interested in. And I was very fortunate because with Kenneth Clark and Jim Robinson and those kind of fellows, we got together and we organized the Harlem Youth Council. But we were very lucky because Juanita Jackson Mitchell, who was then the youth director of the NAACP, introduced me, and she came up and saw what we were doing, and she asked me to join her, and I did. And we organized the United Youth Committee Against Lynching. And that was really the beginning of my understanding why it was that I had to work hard to make the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that I had done an oration on have real significance, and to make it come. And though I was doing that then in high school, here at 97, I'm still working to make the 14th. Still working to make the 14th Amendment of the Constitution fulfill that objective in our country of equal justice under law. And I really will never forget how it was that I, who had come from a small town in Pennsylvania, found myself walking around Times Square in New York, chanting with our Harlem Youth Group and with Juanita Mitchell, and we were chanting, "Stop the lynching." We didn't stop the lynching, but it did stir Lillian Smith, who was a white Southerner woman. She wrote "Strange Fruit," and it exposed it. That was as powerful a document as Uncle Tom's Cabin was that Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote. And in the course of all of this, I think that we learned that every day that the NAACP hung out a sign that said, "A man was lynched today," that was a signal we went into action. And though I say now that we had women and girls, and we were in great numbers, we all worked together. But though the NAACP did not get the anti-lynching bill, what we learned and what we did with the coaching of Thurgood Marshall and Charles Houston and Walter White and others was we learned the importance of really working together. And we didn't get the bill, but I have to say thanks to the NAACP that we made some progress and we stopped lynchings. And when we look to the future, we need to say that we need the NAACP for at least another 100 years to help us move to the future.
That's right. Let's drill down a little bit and do some reflection on the organization itself. And the best way to do that is by asking people who were directly involved to offer some of their observations. Mr. Jordan, you served as the field director in Georgia. Dr. Hooks, you of course serve as executive director. Can you share with us your observations about the most significant involvements that you feel the organization has been conducting over the last 50 years?
Well, the job that I had from 61 to 63 as Georgia Field Secretary of the NAACP was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life, and I've had lots of jobs. But number one, I was working for Ruby Hurley. Oh yeah. And that was quite something. Secondly, I was working for W.W. Law, who was president of the state conference, a great man from Savannah. And then I was working with Medgar Evers in Mississippi, Bob Saunders in Florida, Adi Quincy Newman in South Carolina, and W.C. Patton in Birmingham, who taught me everything I know about voter registration, and John Brooks in Virginia. One of the best parts of my job was that I would pick Roy Wilkins up at the Atlanta airport and drive him to Macon, Georgia for a mass meeting that I'd set up. And then I would drive Clarence Mitchell from the Atlanta airport to Columbus, Georgia. And the next week it would be Gloucester Current to Augusta. I was a very young lawyer, 2 years out of law school, and driving Roy, Clarence, Gloucester for 2 hours at a time was like a postgraduate course. And those conversations and working with Ruby, he always said, when you're setting up a mass meeting, never get the biggest church. Get a medium-sized church, so the press would say there was an overflowing crowd at the NAACP mass meeting. I just want to tell you one story that taught me a lot. There was a problem at the Savannah NAACP between W.W. Law, who was the president, and Hosea Williams, who was the head of Crusade for Voters. You remember Hosea, you remember W.W. And they were in some huge dispute. And Gloucester and Ruby Hurley sent me to Savannah to resolve the dispute. And so I get to the local branch, I put W.W. Law on that side, Hosea Williams on that side, and I said, let's work this out. 30 minutes later, they had both moved directly across from me, and they were whipping my fanny. And what I learned is that local disputes, you let the local people work it out.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me all right? It was a great joy serving for almost 16 years as CEO of the NAACP. We had some marvelous times, some great times. And I'm glad to be at all these great icons. Icons. They've been boiled and poached and fried and roasted and celebrated. And now to have this brief opportunity to be with so many that I've known for so long. And if I have any great memories, there's a marvelous staff that had been assembled. When I went to the NAACP, we were in serious trouble. There'd been a verdict rendered down in Mississippi for over $1 million, and we could not even raise the money to appeal it. It looked like we were going out of business. Somebody said, Ben, why are you leaving the FCC when Andy Young has made it possible for you to become chairman to go to the NAACP? My answer then and now is, I thought then and think now that the NAACP is the greatest organization this nation has known for the promotion of human and civil rights. The New York Times may not acknowledge it, the New York Post may not look at it, and the Daily News may ignore us, but we're here. America would be the laughing stock of the world had it not been for the work of the NAACP. We were there, lynching, restrictive covenants, unequal pay, Brown versus Board of Education, you name it. And now my word to those of you who come in on, it's a very busy day in Jerusalem, AD 33. Young man by the name of Simon had come to see what was happening. Saw a man with a cross on his shoulder. Soldier said, boy, black man, you know, boy, come out of that crowd and help carry that cross. And let me tell you something, whether you're shooting marbles, playing domino, scrabble, or basketball, no matter how much hell you raise, one day it's going to be your turn to do something about it. And let me just say that it's your turn now. If you don't think I did a good job, it's your turn now. If you don't think Andy was a good mayor, it's your turn now. If you don't think Colin was a good general, it's your turn now. Go out, let me hear you say, it's my turn now. It's my turn now. It's my turn now.
Secretary Powell. Secretary Powell, it's your turn now.
What did I do to you, man?
One of the areas that we've seen the greatest progress in, we believe, is the United States military. And obviously, you're a prime example of that. Can you share with us your observations about how you believe the NAACP has had some effect on producing positive change in the military?
You've heard two references to the 101st Airborne Division and their role in Little Rock. 20 years after Little Rock, I was privileged to be a brigade commander of 3,000 soldiers in the 101st Airborne Division. And I would not have been a brigade commander as a black man in the 101st Airborne Division if it had not been for the NAACP and its work over all those years. Now, my story is a little different from the distinguished individuals on the stage. They were all warriors, frontline warriors in our second Civil War through the 50s and 60s. I was in the military during that period of time, and my war was in Vietnam, and I served in Korea and many other places. Although my family stayed in Birmingham in 1963, so I was well aware. My father-in-law was guarding my young wife and infant son that I had never seen in Birmingham, Alabama in the summer of '63. I was in Vietnam fighting for my country, and my father-in-law was fighting for my rights and the rights of all African Americans. And so I am so honored to be among this group of distinguished people who were in the front lines of that war. It was what the NAACP and so many similar organizations did in the course of our nation's history that allowed the military to move forward. It was the NAACP that, in the period of World War I, pushed on the administration of President Wilson to start commissioning more black officers to serve with the black troops that were under the command in Europe of French officers. And when they came back, they were not celebrated. They didn't participate in the parade and going up the streets of Washington, D.C. They were still coming back to a nation that was segregated. But it was a start in that century. It was a start of a change in attitudes toward black men and women serving. And then we came to World War II, where it was the NAACP and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and all of the pressure that was put on Roosevelt to start opening up civilian employment to all Americans who wanted to work for the war effort, to include African Americans, especially African Americans. And it was after World War II when we had demonstrated in the skies with the Tuskegee Airmen. We had demonstrated on the ground with the Montford Point Marines, with the Golden 13 of the Navy. We had shown once again, as we had throughout the entire course of our history, that the only thing that really counts is, are you as valorous and courageous as your fellow white soldier? And if you were, then you deserved every benefit of citizenship that that fellow white soldier enjoyed, and it had to happen. It had to come. And then finally, in 1948, it was President Truman who decided that this had to end, and he signed that executive order. It took another 5 years before the last segregated unit was eliminated in the armed forces, and I came in 4 years later. And when I came in 1958, the Army has a way of ordering things to happen. And what they essentially said was, we are now integrated. There'll be no more segregation. Lieutenant Powell, listen carefully. We don't care if you're black, green, blue, or yellow. Don't give us any hard luck stories about growing up in the Bronx or that your parents were immigrants. The only thing we care about is performance. And the only thing we're going to measure you by is performance. But to get to that point where I would be measured solely by performance, it took the work of the NAACP for all those years to make that possible. People sometimes think, well, gee, you became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as if I just dropped out of the sky and became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And you're the black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I'm the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who happens to be black. There ain't no white chairman somewhere. And so I'm proud of what I was able to achieve, but I have never forgotten that I just didn't drop in. It was these men and women who did it for me, and thousands like them who did it for me. And we've got to keep teaching our kids. That's the way it happens. Now, let me say, maybe jumping ahead of the moderator, a word about where we have to go, because we have got a remarkable record of 100 years of service the NAACP has. Absolutely remarkable. And we've changed this country and changed it so fundamentally for the better. But where are we going? I'm going to use two numbers, 50 and 70. 50% of our African American kids are not finishing high school. 70% of our children are being born out of wedlock. They are connected. If our kids cannot read well by the 3rd grade, they're going to be in jail by the time they're 17 or 18. If our families do not come back together and teach children to mind your manners, mind your adults, if we don't teach respect, what the NAACP and all of us have to focus on is not just the past generations, it's the generations that are ahead. And those generations are in trouble. We are at a situation where if you looked at the inner city 9 of today, you would find that 6 of those 9 are not going to graduate from high school. Is this what they sacrificed for? so that we'd bring future generations along that are not finishing high school. There is nothing more important for us as a nation and as the African American people of this nation than to get back down with our kids and start giving them the impetus they need to get their education and to start putting our families together. We got to start putting our families together and restore a sense of pride and dignity, the kind of pride and dignity that we have all tried to demonstrate in our lives. That has to be the inspiration for our future generations.
Let's turn now to one of our frontline soldiers in the civil rights movement. The NAACP, of course, is and will continue to be the preeminent civil rights organization, but there are other groups out there that are also working for some of the same causes. Reverend Jackson, can you share with us some of your observations about what the NAACP has done in order to help you make Operation Rainbow Push successful?
Well, thank you very much. Number one, all of us are members of the NAACP. And whatever branch we are off of that tree, it's the same tree. I want to at first express my thanks first to the Chairman Julian Bond for his leadership in SNCC. Then an elected official chose principal politics and defied the state of Georgia and did not get his seat in the legislature against the war. That was defiance, and we thank Julian Bond because he helped inspire our generation. When Vernon Jordan led Galt and Holmes to the University of Georgia in the face of that same kind of belligerence, we owe a special debt of gratitude to Vernon Jordan for that act, those acts of courage. I do want to say that this is a significant week for me. July 16, 1960, 7 of us went to jail this week, 49 years ago, trying to use a public library. As NAACP youth leaders, Reverend A.J. Whittenberg convened us, along with Ida Quincy Newman, to begin to defy the law. Reverend James Hall was our leader, prepared us to go to the library and be prepared to go to jail. And we went after taking the test. If they put a cigarette on your back, shirk it off, I mean, really nonviolent discipline. We went to the library, and the police were there, and they said, if you don't go back, you'll be arrested. We rushed back to the church. Reverend Hall said, why are you back so fast? We say, well, we're back because they were going to arrest us. He said, that's why I sent you. Go back to jail. But there's a non-stop between July 16, 1960, and speaking before the Democratic Convention, July 17, 1984, the same week, 24 years later, all driven by the same NAACP drive for freedom. Just one slight deviation, and it's difficult to disagree with Chairman Powell. Wow. When he said he was not in the civil rights movement, I think we define the movement in terms much too narrow. Because as certain doors came down, the struggle was against race supremacy. We had to demythologize it. So when a soldier did well, that was the movement. When Jackie Robinson did well, if Jackie had hit 220 rather than 340, when Sammy Davis Jr. did well, when Sidney Poitier did well, when Harry Belafonte did well, when Josephine Baker did well, that was the same movement, but different roles in the same movement. And so Secretary Powell doing well has made all of us better and better off. We thank you for that, General Powell. My concern today is that we're speaking too much in the past tense. We assumed up until recently that it was the inequality that drove our predicament. Some I presume is our lack of effort that drives our predicament. Effort must always exceed the opportunity to make progress, but we are in some structural deficits. Just this week in New York, it reported that blacks are 4 times less likely to get a job than whites. That's not an effort crisis, that is a structural inequality crisis. We have the joy of an African-American president of our choosing. We have the Williams sisters and Tiger Woods and these very successful athletes. Why are they so successful against the greatest of odds? Because whenever the playing field is even and the rules are public and the goals are clear and there are fair referees, we can make it. But so while they're playing on an even playing field, but for the masses of our people, we're number 1 in infant mortality, number 1 in short life expectancy. We won the 54 decision to make racial inequality illegal. We lost the 74 decision to make funding disparity legal. So inner city kids are being asked to swim without the pool or to do computer work without the computer. And so there are 2.3 million Americans in prison today. 1 million are black, 500,000 are Latino. And if you're targeted and don't have the best of lawyers, you face the odds of a crack cocaine powder disparity. The documentation is led by NAACP in Baltimore, is that in Wells Fargo, the case of Countrywide, that we are targeted for home foreclosures. We're targeted, cleared, and clustered. And so we are now free, but not equal. That's the fundamental issue, that we are free, and that's why President Douglas said in the 19th century, you're free from slavery, but free without Reconstruction, you're free to starve. You're free to be ill-housed. You're free to be abandoned. So today, unless we target the stimulus to where the needs are greatest, we are free to celebrate, but also free to be less employed, free to be more jailed, free to be more ill-housed. And so today, we challenge our government to, in fact, don't just stimulate the banks top down, stimulate the neediest people bottom up. Thank you very much.
Reverend Jackson, you make reference to the political changes that have taken place, and of course tomorrow evening we'll have an opportunity to see the most significant result of those changes. But it's important for us to try and get a sense of what the transition has been over the past few years, both at the national level and at the state level. So let me turn to Congressman Conyers, Ambassador Young, former Congressman, and Governor Wilder, in that order, because I'd like to get their sense of what the NAACP has been able to do to affect the national political and legislative agenda, and from Governor Wilder, some understanding of how the NAACP has been able to affect change at the state level.
Can I pick up on Jesse right quick? Because when he talked about the stimulus at the top and not at the bottom, one of the things we've been talking to the FDIC and SEC about is why not have a bank account for every American citizen? And we know that if we're in democracy without the right to vote, we're slaves, but we're in a system of capitalism without access to capital. And there could be very easily, with all of this stimulus, it would be good for the banks. And the banks have not expressed any difficulty if there was a direct deposit of all of the possible benefits. Half of our people are entitled to an earned income tax credit and don't get it. But if it were automatically going to an account, if they automatically had a picture ID, if they automatically were part of the economy, we'd solve a lot of our problems. But now, let me go back, because I want to go back, Colin, to one of my heroes in the NAACP was Ralph Bunche. Because Ralph Bunche was doing studies on, he did all of the intelligence studies on Africa as a OSS assignee from Howard University. Almost everything you see at the United Nations, Ralph Bunche wrote. I contend, and I can't document this, but I contend that Ralph Bunche did the intelligence in North Africa that helped the Tuskegee Airmen be successful. And so we don't know the history of all of the things. And Ralph Bunche said to Martin Luther King and me one time, the problem with you all is that too much of what you do is public. If you're going to succeed in this business, you got to keep most of it under the water. And Ralph Bunche never in fact, he tried to turn down the Nobel Prize. And when he came to Atlanta in 1964, we couldn't give him a hotel room. And so here was a race man that I think had more impact on this nation than anybody knows, and we don't know enough about him. Now, I was fortunate enough in 5th grade to go to see Thurgood Marshall and Alexander Pierre Toureau plead the case for the equalization of teachers' salaries in Louisiana in 1941. And there was a series of victories, and there wasn't a separation between the Legal Defense Fund, and it was all NAACP back then. And there was a systematic breakdown of all of the laws that affected us in the South from 1941 right on up to 1954. And I think it would be good for us to see how, well, there were 60 kids in my 4th grade class. And my teacher was getting paid 35% of what the white teachers were getting. No way I could be supposed, I mean, that was the structural inequality of the South that the NAACP broke down before we in SCLC got started. Now, when we got started, Harris Warford was here. And Harris Warford was a student at Howard University that wrote about civil disobedience. He happens to be white, former senator from Pennsylvania, but he'd read about Gandhi. And he was the one that got us in trouble with Thurgood Marshall. Because here for 40 years, we'd had breaking down the law. I mean, breaking down the legal barriers. And suddenly, in 1960, a group of young upstarts want to take it on our own, and we're going to selectively decide to be civil disobedience. That was, I mean, my parents almost put me out over that. But it took us just about a year before Constance Motley and all of the same lawyers across the South, Wiley Branton, Arthur Shores, Donald Hollowell, all of them, I mean, whenever you see a picture of Martin Luther King doing anything, you see a picture of an NAACP lawyer. And so we have not had a divided movement. We've had a united front even when we disagreed. And I think that looking now at where we go from here, the two things I want to focus on is getting everybody a bank account and voting on a weekend. Of the almost 200 nations that vote, we are down in the lower third. But all of those where people vote, 70, 80, 90%, they vote on weekends. They don't vote on work days. Now, we in Georgia can vote for 30 days, but it's 30 work days. We cannot vote on weekends. So weekend voting, and the only reason we put voting on a Tuesday was because that was a good day for farmers. And now there are only 1.7% of the people in America farming. And everybody else is living in the city, and we ought to be able to vote Saturday and Sunday and all the time leading up to that. And that's where I think we need to push this movement.
That's a great segue into my presentation. You know, Andy, there ought to be a law. Great idea. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so honored to be on the stage. I'm the most recent Spring Iron awardee, and maybe presumptively the youngest Spring Iron awardee. No, I just wanted to try that on for size. But I close this discussion on this note. The two people that inspired me, in addition to this great history that's been recited up here, is Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. And Barack Obama. Here's three. Why? Because in each case, they were told that they couldn't do it. Every time. Nelson Mandela, sentenced to life in prison, became the first democratically elected president of South Africa. They told him he was lucky to be alive, much less, and have his senses, and to get out of prison and to become its leader. And then there was Martin Luther King, who was advised against starting this movement in the South, and then to invoke nonviolence after having been to study nonviolent theory. They said, oh no, this will never work. And then more recently, tomorrow's special guest. You know, the 44th President of the United States jump-started and stands on the shoulders of everything that has been done by this organization for 100 years. That's why he's coming tomorrow. I close on this observation. Certainly there's got to be more responsibility and parental this and that. Look, we are not in a recession, we are in a depression right this minute. And a lot of these folks that need to be talked to by their parents don't have any parents. And I think there may be a governmental responsibility to create a full employment society instead of giving these trillions of dollars to the people that brought on the depression. Let's put everybody to work. And then they can create their bank accounts. Let's put everybody to work and create jobs. Well, that makes me recall, even in my moderate youth, the Humphrey Hawkins Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act by Senator Hubert Humphrey and the late Gus Hawkins, who was the dean of the Congressional Black Caucus before me. And there's very little talk about putting everybody to work. It's trillions to this and trillions to that, and help the auto industry, and don't let the banks. How can AIG be too big to fail? And we're giving them billions, and what are they doing? They're going to have vacation retreats with our bailout money, and then giving rewards to their top executives in the millions of dollars. President Obama, I want some of you to tell him, I've got to go back to vote, but you tell him, let's start having more accountability for all this money they're getting, and let's do more to stimulate people, as Reverend Jackson said, from the bottom up and not the top down. Thank you, NAACP.
Well, I think that my colleagues have said it all. I'm obviously humbled not only by receiving the award, but by likewise being here. It's historical when you consider 100 years. But Ben Hooks, Colin Powell, Jesse, and others have pretty much put their hands right on it. The NAACP, in its infancy, was thinking about not themselves, but those who followed them. They knew that their lot was almost forsaken. Look at the song that was written by James Weldon Johnson, and how he said, at a time when hope unborn was dead. So what he is saying, that even in spite of that absence of hope, there is something for our children. My grandparents were slaves. My mother's people were not. I had aunts and uncles that were slaves. And yet they knew somewhere, somehow, there might be an opportunity for this little boy in Virginia. And yet when I look back and recognize some of the things that the NAACP has done for me, I listened to Vernon. I was a couple of years ahead of him, 1 year ahead of him in law school. Vernon, I recall, shortly after having graduated from Howard Law School, I was asked by Spotswood Robinson if I wanted to help him. Can you believe? Did I want to help him? When and how and when? I broke my neck. And he said, well, Doug, I want you to go with me because we're going to Howard Law School. There we're going to have the moot court preparation for the defense of the NAACP lawyers that they're trying to put out in this bar. Sam Tucker, Otto Tucker. And we need to go. And would you go with me? Will I go? Let me drive. So I drove up there. Sitting there, I had the chance to meet these giants. Bob Ming from Chicago, Bob Carter from New Jersey, Trudeau from New Orleans, Mark Moriarty's dad, Dutch, from New Orleans, Louis Redding from Delaware. I'm watching these guys, Jim Neighbor to Dean, George E.C. Hayes being there, and what were they doing? Getting their forces ready to tell the Virginia State Bar, you are not going to drive these people out of business. And that was the whole effort. If they could stop the NAACP, they could stop progress. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Before the case was tried, once they found out who was coming with that army, case dismissed. Case dismissed. That put something into me when Spotswood Robinson said to me, would you have any objection if I would ask Thurgood to appoint you to take my place? I'm going to be the dean at the law school, but I want you to be the registered agent for the NAACP Inc. Fund. Would I take it? In a heartbeat. So I had occasion to meet all of those people. I had occasion to participate in many of the cases. But more importantly, I had occasion also to recognize what could be done. I recall earlier this year, I was in a church, and a lady brought up her two sons, and one looked at me and said, I'm going to be the President of the United States. Another said, I'm going to be governor of Virginia. I said, in their minds, they see it. About 15 years ago, I was in a church, and a little boy came up to me, and he said, are you Doug Wilder? I said, yeah. His father said, Mr. Wilder. He said, you Doug Wilder? I said, yeah. Governor of this something? Yeah. He said, haven't you been dead? What he meant was for him to read about accomplishments means that these people were not there. So when these two young boys came to me this year, and with resolution in their eyes and spirit in their voice, saying, I am going to be the President of the United States, I said, you can be anything you want to be in this country, and we're going to help you get there.
I think when we look ahead, and obviously some of the sessions that are going to be occurring in the near future, looking at internationalism, looking at globalism, looking at the ways in which the U.S. engages the world. And of course, the president's just coming back from Ghana, a very significant occasion for him and for all of us. What are your thoughts? I'd like to start with you, Secretary Powell, and then anyone who has some thoughts about this. How can we frame a set of relationships and connections with other countries, particularly those in Africa and the Caribbean? How can the NAACP help so that as our young people are beginning to become citizens of the world, they're prepared to take their rightful place?
We are all citizens of the world now, in a world that is quite different than the world I started out in as an adult some 50-odd years ago. The information revolution, the way in which our children are communicating with each other, the fact that all of us old folks up here are analog, trying to be digital. Let me tell you. But our children are born hardwired digital. And my children, and one of my daughters is here, and my grandchildren keep trying to keep me up to date. I'm pretty good. But I'm pedaling as fast as I can. They wanted me to go on Facebook. I said, no, I'm not going on Facebook. And then the next day, one of my assistants said, you're already on Facebook. I said, they can't put me on Facebook if I don't want to be on Facebook. They said, you're already on Facebook. And I said, well, I'm going to call a lawyer. I'm going to sue him. I said, but you already got 10,000 friends. Okay. Now, that's funny, but it reflects the nature of the changing world. Mm-hmm. The world is interconnected. Tom Friedman says the world is flat. The world is globalizing. Just think of the world that we're living in, where one of the most still developing countries in the world is financing one of the richest countries in the world. China is financing us. Mm-hmm. Where do they get the money? By selling stuff in Walmart. This is the nature of the world we live in. It is a far better world than the world I started out in all those years ago. We're not facing two empires that meant for our destruction, the Soviet Empire, the Chinese Empire. We still have problems in Iraq and Afghanistan. But for the most part, many of the barriers that used to exist are gone. What the NAACP can help do, particularly with its youth programs, is to educate our youngsters in a manner that prepares them for this kind of information-driven, globalized economic system that we are all living in now. Our children have to learn languages, they have to learn more about geography, they have to learn more about other cultures, other religions, and they have to be ready to be citizens of a global environment and not just citizens of the United States of America. And I think the NAACP can help in this regard through its youth and educational programs.
Mm-hmm. Moderator, just one word of personal privilege. Is Frances here? My wife, is she here? All right, I thought she'd be here because she won't hear me speak again. But Frances, would you give a hand even in her absence? Thank you for all you've done. And I'm still saying, the river's wide and I can't step it. Love you, baby, and I can't help it. Thank you, thank you.
Reverend Jackson.
You mentioned the global community. We live in our faith, whatever it may be. We live under the law. NAACP's most salient contribution was affording us equal protection under the law. The 54 decision changed the law. The 55 boycott was testing the law. The 57 Little Rock decision was challenging the law. 64, 65 right was challenging the law. Now we have some global laws that are giving us an uneven playing field. Last year, we got 750,000 cars from South Korea. They got 5,000 from us. because we've globalized capital driven by the banks. We've not globalized human rights, workers' rights, women's rights, children's rights, and the environment. Therefore, we cannot compete on an uneven playing field. So restructuring the trade agreements is a big deal. Just restructuring, we don't have an effort deficit. I'm rather convinced of that. In these inner cities where the plants have closed and the jobs have left, drugs and guns are coming. You die no matter how much effort you put forward. When schools are funded by the tax base and there's no tax base, our schools are legally inferior and we cannot compete. In Chicago, we're trying to get the Olympic Games, but not Olympic education. So our kids don't have even the charter schools that do not have track and field and bars. We cannot compete because of the playing field is not even. And I would think that now as we look at the impact of, as you say, China and Walmart, not long ago, the big three was GM, Chrysler, and Ford. Now the big three in Detroit are three gambling casinos because of the uneven playing field. And that's going to be ultimately, because with this historic stimulus put forth by our president, we're still losing 600,000 jobs a month. We are 4.4 million homes in foreclosure a year, with 20 million underwater, and 100 billion a year in student loan debt, competing with credit card debt for being the burden around our necks. And so I think you raised to me a trigger question, that is, if we are into globalization, it must be globalization of effort, but globalization of rules. And last I went to Malaysia about 2 months ago, and somebody said, why are you going to Malaysia? We're over yonder. I said, you push your button and your car turns on, that's Malaysia. That flat top TV screen, Malaysia. That microchip, Malaysia. But the workers at the BMW plant in Malaysia are making at max $500 a year and selling BMWs for $450,000 a year. Detroit cannot compete with $500 a month wages. That requires a reordering of our global competitive playing field. Thank you.
Ambassador Young, you've been an elected official at the local level, at the national level in terms of Congress, and served as ambassador to the UN. What do you see ahead for us?
One of the things I just learned a few years ago from Schaumburg up in Harlem was that we had 4.5 million slaves that came here during the slave trade. But there are over 5 million Africans that have come here voluntarily since 1970. And they are the second most educated group of immigrants coming into the United States. Now, what we've been working on in Atlanta is trying to make it possible for them to get back home. Not putting them out, but what you saw in India, and I was with Mrs. King in India in 1970, she said, and Indira Gandhi said, I tell our boys and girls, go to America, make as much money as you can, learn as much as you can, but hurry back to Mother India. And we see them doing that. Now, there's 7 flights a day now between Atlanta and Africa. And they're flying full. The most profitable flight in Delta's whole system is between Atlanta and Lagos. Now, that's money. And Nigerians send back $9 billion a year to Nigeria to help develop it. Ghanaians send back $3.5 to $4 billion a year. We're a part of an international network. And I'm just trying to figure out how to make it work and how to understand it. It's not easy, and I have not been able to be successful doing a lot of business in Africa, even though I've been trying. I have helped American businesses when they get in trouble for doing all the wrong things. But it's a funny relationship between us and the rest of the world. But one that we've got to figure out. I'd just like to say one more thing about Nelson Mandela, and not in any way negative. But Nelson Mandela did not get out of jail just because white people got sympathetic at his 27 years of suffering. Nelson Mandela got out of jail because Nigeria caught England sending oil to Nigeria. They canceled $2.1 billion worth of British contracts to Nigeria, and they kicked Conoco Oil out and said, you can't do business with us and South Africa. Then Margaret Thatcher sent Lord Carrington down, and they sat down with General Obasanjo, and they worked out this eminent persons group to say to South Africa, you got to get Nelson Mandela out of jail. Not because they liked Nelson Mandela, but because they liked the business that they were doing with Nigeria. Now, that is a power factor that we're just beginning to understand. And I was saying to General Powell that I look to the military to help us with this, because Africa is too big and too complex for us to figure out. But if we train African military, the African military, most of the people, Rwanda is working now because Paul Kagame studied in Leavenworth, Kansas, and when their genocide broke out, he went back and got an army and established peace. They created a government where nobody can win. The election is about ideas, but each group has the same number of persons. The only requirement of the party is that at least 30% of all of the appointed or elected officials be women. They have a government of 48% female. They started off with education and technology. Now, I'm saying that this is a little country, and one general who was trained here has had a major impact on that whole part of Southeast Africa. Now, Northeast Africa, Sudan is impossible. I get upset with my white friends who want to put people in jail and this, that, and the other. But if you put Sudan on the United States, it goes from Maine to Key West, Florida, from the Outer Banks of North Carolina all the way out to Cincinnati. And they don't have any roads. They don't have any railroads, you know? And we're trying to expect them to act like we acted. They're acting like we acted with the Indians 200 years ago. And you don't condemn people with war crimes until you sit down, try to get them together, and work it all out. We can't do all that. But if we train Africans themselves to understand how to resolve that, we will have an ally. And I'm convinced that the African global place is the missing piece of the puzzle in a global economy. This economy is not going to make sense globally as long as we're competing with Europe and China. If we put Africa in the equation, they have enough needs, they have enough resources, they have all of the things that the rest of the world needs to survive, but we haven't plugged them in. And that's what I would hope we would be doing in the future generations.
Yeah, clearly we need to reorient our thinking to have a more global perspective, but the points you raised about the participation of women, I think, is something that also needs some domestic consideration as well. So I'd like to turn back to Dr. Height and get her perspectives on where we stand in terms of engaging women much more in the political and the process of social change, how the NAACP can be even more effective in the next 100 years than it's been in the last 100 years. Dr. Hyde?
I didn't quite hear. One of the things that I've been really concerned about is that I think as we look to the future, we need to be conscious of where we are as a family in the United States. And we need to look at where women are in the United States. You know, I always say that African American women are very special because we seldom do what we want to do, but we always do what we have to do. Women played a tremendous role in the civil rights movement and helped us to get where we are. But I think we have to be equally aware that some of the legislation that is now being challenged and threatened, and some of it really beginning to be weakened, affects women. And we have to be very conscious of the importance of making sure that we realize that there's no way, when so many of our children are reared in homes with women alone, there's no way to improve the quality of life for our families as a whole without improving the conditions for women. And so, I think as we keep moving forward, I believe the strength of the NAACP against the tide that we're facing could make a difference. It is showing up now that we really need it, not only against the hate groups, but also against the diminishing of some of the gains that we thought we had won, but they seem more tentative than they used to be. And I think that's a task for us all.
Dr. Hooks, can you pick up on that thing? This is the 100th year. It'll be 101 next year. And so as you look ahead, having been in the position of having responsibility for the NAACP, what are your thoughts? What are your observations about the kind of things that need to be done?
Before I can tell them what ought to be done, I got to find my mic. Can't seem to keep up with it. But I think that I said in my little address the other night, first of all, there are too many black athletes, black people making billions of dollars who give nothing back to the black community. And I think we've got to find a way to tell it and let it be known. I never will forget in Kansas City in '75 when we had Michael Jackson out, and we met with him. And one of the agreements he made, which was significant at that time, Jesse, you remember, was wherever he had a concert, we could do voter registration. And people have forgotten that about Michael Jackson in Kansas City 25 years ago. We also have got to we've got to deal with this right-wing hate radio. I don't know what can be done, but to have a man on radio saying day after day that he hopes that Obama will fail, how stupid can you get? How stupid can you get? Well, if Obama fails, the nation fails. Did I make that clear? Mm-hmm. If Obama fails, the nation fails. And hasn't he done a good job? Let's give him a big hand for Obama. And finally, I recognize this is a digital age and all of that, but there's no excuse for print papers to have ignored the 100th anniversary of the best organization for human and civil rights that this nation has known. I don't know what we would have looked like without it, and as we move forward to the future with Mr. Jellos as our new CEO, we've got to support him. Let's not turn against each other. Let's turn to each other and help to build this, because if it had not been for the NAACP, I repeat, we would have been the laughing stock of the world if we were talking about human rights and still segregated in Alabama. So thank God for all of these people who work And those of you who have the future, as a man that wrote the poem in Flanders Field, to you, from fallen hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you let go of that flame we give you, justice will not reign in America. Thank you very much.
Let's finally then turn things back to where we started. I'm sorry.
One time, not long ago, the Cleveland Browns were playing the New York Jets football game. And I think the Jets had like 4th and 4 to go, something like that. And they missed, they only got 3 yards. And therefore Cleveland had won the game with 30 seconds, 10 seconds to go. And the Cleveland Brown player, in excitement, threw his helmet off. He was penalized. He shouted before the game was over. Jets got the ball back, 15 yards, kicked the field goal and won the game. I'm anxious about us shouting, looking back, before the game is over. We won the freedom struggle. We're just beginning the equality struggle. I go to several NAACP freedom banquets a year. And I'll go to any equality banquets. We are free, absolutely free. But except Johnson Publishing Building in Chicago downtown and North Carolina Mutual in Durham, Citizen Trust in Atlanta, we don't own a downtown building nowhere in America. Free, but not equal. How many of you on a student loan? Raise your hand, student loan. Raise your hand real high. We are paying $100,000 to $200,000 in student loan debt. GM and Chrysler could use bankruptcy laws to discharge their obligations and then get funded. But student loans are non-dischargeable. They're not protected by truth in lending laws. So what was grants, General Powell, in our time are now loans, and they're unforgivable loans. So many of our ablest youth cannot afford to attend school, others cannot stay in school. And ironically, many of the students, say from India and Africa, can say because their governments are funding them, and our government is fleecing us. So the banks can borrow money at 0% interest. The government can borrow money at 0.54% interest. They lend the students at 8%. So the government and the banks are scapping student loans. The government makes enough money off of student loan defaults to fund the Pell Grant. So unless we deal with the issue of equality beyond freedom, we will have missed. We need, in Chicago, in our close, they had a Northern Trust Bank, got $2 billion of money it didn't ask for, and they sent the money back. If that $2 billion had gone to 10 community banks at the bottom, they could have modified home foreclosures. They could reduce student loan. They could have invested in community businesses that employ the most people with the least restriction in the house. So I think our idea of now fighting for, now say we're free. So we're free. We're not equal. And we cannot think that you're going to close the structural funding gap just by the joy of last year's victory was a climax to 100 years of fighting for freedom. And the same force, as Dr. King said in his book, who are our freedom allies, will not necessarily be our equality allies. Because while effort and excellence is a big deal, inheritance and access is a bigger deal. And so fighting for inheritance and access and equality becomes, I think, the next century struggle.
So perhaps the appropriate thing to do is to close this session the way we started, by hearing from representatives from the Little Rock Nine. And I'd like to ask the 5 of you who are here, you demonstrated your own personal courage and your concern when you participated in the activity in Little Rock, and you've already demonstrated your gratitude to the NAACP for helping you. So now, as we move into these next 100 years, from your perspective, you're looking back on your own accomplishments, both personal and collective, what would you say to Mr. Jealous and the other representatives from NAACP here, your observations about what the organization should be doing as we move forward into the second 100 years?
Hello. This organization has been dedicated to supporting education in all of its years of existence, and I would say certainly that is a key point to think about as we move forward. And I'm not talking about progress through formal institutions. I'm talking about developing personal awareness of who you are and who you are in relation to all others in this universe. In 1954, the legal landscape was changed dramatically, but it came after 335 years of legalized discrimination. And if you discriminate for 335 years, you do not stop on a dime in 1954 because 9 judges say cease and desist. So we have to think about the leakage and the spillover and the systemic elements woven into the fabric of this current society. A lot of people think that slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment. Think again. Slavery was abolished as late as 1945 in this country. Think about it. And in your education, you'll find that out. Education, to me, is so essential. As a kid, I heard from everybody in my community, boy, get your education. Even from people who had no formal education, because they too understood what that meant. And I think, above all things, we must insist that our young people demand of themselves excellence in education. Thank you.
Well, I want to add my voice to this distinguished group. It's an honor to be here. We of the 9 were, I still think, the youngest recipients of the Spingarn Medal, and probably the only group. So we occupy a unique distinction. But education was, as Terrence indicated, the cornerstone of what we thought we were pursuing at Central. It was the guiding light. It was the words we heard from our parents and our neighbors and our supporters and ministers and others that we should pursue the best we could. I think the discussion today on the economy and economic interest and the globalization that we're dealing with, we're still down to fundamentals of blocking and tackling, of trying to understand how to get the best out of where you are at this moment, set high goals for yourself, go beyond the reading list that the school gives you, go beyond the questions that the teacher poses for you, learn to speak Chinese and Russian and French and whatever the languages of commerce are going to be. Understand that you have a special opportunity to make a change. You know, as Michael Jackson's song says, you can make a change in this world. And if you believe that, you've got thousands, millions of people behind you, and this organization, the NAACP, with people like Daisy Bates and Reverend Crenshaw, in my view, represent that history. But we've got to get beyond just the dustbins of history and move forward to the next century. And I think education is that blocking and tackling that gets you there.
I think all of these things have been very well said. I, too, am very pleased to be here and share this stage with all these icons. Really, the bottom line is education is the road to success. And that's what I learned as a small child, heard it all my life. And that was the impetus for me to want to go to Little Rock Central High School in 1957. We need to continue to do that with our, and speak those types of truths to our children. And I think so many of us have attained so much that we have forgotten to teach our young children why they are where they are today. And we need to do more of that. And I say grandparents and aunts and uncles, take the time to spend with these young children to help them to understand why we have these freedoms as Reverend Jackson has mentioned. And we are free. We are free to do whatever we would like to do. And we need to just work hard towards that. And I know the NAACP will continue to do that and build on the youth to make this a better world to live in and be a part of this global community. And as stated before by Ernie, we do need to not only learn English, we haven't learned it very well, but we need to continue to do that, but also have that second and third language. A second language would be great. So that is what I'd like to see the NAACP to continue to do. And you know, it's wonderful to be able to celebrate 100 years. We celebrated our 50th 2 years ago, and I know how that felt. So this 100th celebration is something to really check off and enjoy and feel good about.
I absolutely agree with my colleagues. However, I would like to say that the children are not in charge. They do not set the curriculum. They do not make the policy. They do not determine whether or not they get the education. I think we need a few more universals in this capitalist economy. We need universal education for all our children. We need universal health care for all our children, because if we don't, we continue to maintain a really damaging, unequal system. So I propose, of course, and everyone knows this, but that the and I really agree with Terrence about education being the bottom line, but it's education at the core and at the bottom as babies, as young children. We have fallen short as a society in educating our children. So it seems to me that we would continue to demand education in the interest of all. And I'm talking about universals, maybe not capitalistic or capitalism, but we have to make that kind of demand. It's kind of like the guaranteed income that Conyers was talking about, universal rights and responsibilities. Thank you.
Briefly, I'd like to say that education is the underlying thing, the reason we need success. But I'd like to add from a different perspective. We keep saying the children need to be educated, and as many said, the children are not in charge. We need to instill within the children the importance of the need for education. And children still learn by example. We have too many of the parents boasting and bragging about being, well, I'm a single parent, you know, and I don't know why they should hold this up as an excuse for anything they failed to do. Lots of people in my neighborhood in Little Rock were single parents. And until you went to the house, you couldn't tell there was no man present, because everybody in the neighborhood raised each of the children. And they say it takes a village to raise a child. Maybe we need to incorporate some more villages in this country. And we need to, in my preteen days, it was like we were homeschooled before we were sent to school. And in my naive way, I thought all families worked that way, and the whole world operated the way my family did. It was embarrassing when I got to my college economics 101 class and found the economic structure that my family fitted in all the poor classes of people in this country. But I didn't know that until I got to college. So it did not affect affect my education and desires or anything. I was a happy child. I had a family to support me, and I think maybe we can try that with some of the kids.
We had follow-up comments from Ambassador Young and Mr. Jordan, and then we'll bring this session to a close.
I just wanted to, go ahead.
This is a very historic moment. And I think, and this has been a great morning, but I would like for you all to go and get Pat Sullivan's book, Lift Every Voice, and read in the very first chapter where W.B. Du Bois has left his professorship at Atlanta University to come to New York and head research and publications for the NAACP. And when he gets here and goes to the office at the Evening Post, Mr. Villard says to him, "I have no money with which to pay you." And the point that I'm making, we have done so much with so little. We have never made the budget in the Urban League and the NAACP and in SNCC. We have never been over budget, but the historic lesson is that we have accomplished so much with so little, which suggests that now we got things that we never had. A black president, black CEOs at Aetna, Xerox, and American Express, people sitting in places that we have never sat, having money and influence that we've never had. So now that we have so much more, the responsibility on us for achievement is greater than it was when Du Bois came to New York. Thank you.
I wanted to point to Vernon as where we need to go. And that, I mean, Vernon and I sit on a couple of committees together, and I don't know anything about money. I've been to more schools, and I got almost 75 honorary degrees, and nobody ever taught me about money. So I have to lean over and say, Vernon. And Vernon knows about money. Now, you can learn all the Chinese you want, see? You can learn all the French and Spanish, but I saw something at Georgia Tech, and it was white folks. The fellow that got put out of Georgia Tech went across the street and opened something called the Varsity. It's a hot dog stand. He is the largest contributor to Georgia Tech. Now, you don't have to be a physicist if you know how to save money, invest money, and you don't mind working. Now, you can talk about capitalism all you want, but that's what we have. The kind of thing, I'm sorry to criticize John after he's gone, but we were thinking, all of us were thinking in the 60s about a world that was stable. It had been organized by Franklin Roosevelt. They sat down in New Hampshire at Bretton Woods, and there were all kinds of agreements. The dollar was the king, and the dollar was tied to gold. Nixon broke that up in 1973. And now it's every man for himself. And people do more things that people are doing. Well, they used to call them robber barons. And they put in a legislation called the Glass-Steagall Act. Well, they got rid of that. See? There was something that separated the savings and loans from the commercial banks, Regulation Q. They got rid of that. Then the savings and loans got into gambling casinos and went broke, and the banks got into housing and didn't know what they were doing. They dismantled all of the stability that this economy had in a kind of a freewheeling capitalism that is not fair to anybody that wasn't born rich. Now, Obama is going to have to sit down, and all of that he's doing now is wonderful, but I think that's the reason God put him on earth. because you got to have somebody that can get the Saudis and the Nigerians and the Indonesians to balance out some of the ignorance and dominance that has come out of Europe. And there is a global struggle right now for a globally just economy. And poor nations will always be poor unless our president can get them together to sit down to realize that either we're all going to grow forward, as Dr. King used to say, we're going to either learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we're going to perish economically as fools.
You know, where I thought Vernon was going with that story, just another angle, is that in that season of our freedom fighting, our best minds chose to invest in the struggle for the next generation. God forbid if Dr. Du Bois had gone on to become a dean at Harvard and just wrote about our struggle, or if Thurgood Marshall had become a great downtown corporate lawyer. Our best minds reinvested in the freedom struggle. We had our best minds against their best minds and won against the odds. And so to have more of everything and less sacrifice will get less results. And in part, Vernon's stature as a young lawyer, Vernon had gone straight to corporate world before his leading people in the school at the University of Georgia. We would have missed, we don't have a talent deficit, there's a sacrifice deficit among those who have benefited from this dimension. The second reason why the Spanish thing is important, the 100 largest cities are majority black and brown. That's the politics of our future. The 100 largest, 2/3 of our hemisphere speak Spanish. So before we jump hemispheres, right here, 2/3 of our neighbors speak Spanish. And if you're in LA, New York, or Miami, your political victories are going to be black, Hispanic, progressive, white coalitions. Learn that language. The third thing, Dr. King did his oratorical contest at age 14 on the Constitution. He finished high school at 15, finished college at 19, seminary at 22, and a PhD at 26. Those who would now lead us invested heavily in intellectual development to lead the bigger fight for the long haul. And I think the part of the Michael Jackson story that got missed last week in our close was that we focused on Beverly Hills and Hollywood and all of that, but there were 11 people living in a 4-room house on 2300 Jackson Street. A 2-parent household. Joe was a crane operator and didn't make enough money at that, went back and became a welder and a crane operator. And the father taught the boys music and discipline by night. They didn't have the street option because they had a strong armed daddy that some protest against, but there were 6 boys in 1 room in double bunk beds and 3 girls in the front room. They left Gary, Indiana with a very strong, disciplined, praying mother who made all of their clothes. They ate in rotation because there were 11 people living in 4 rooms. And so there's something to be said about opportunity, but effort must exceed opportunity to bring about change. And that Michael Jackson comes out of a household, a 2-parent household, a working class family, where the boys next door had to act like the Jacksons acted, because in that house, there was order. In that house, they didn't have street option because there was a disciplinarian, working class, 2-parent house. So Michael said to me on one occasion that when we hit the stage, we knew we had our living room was our stepping place. And the church was where we learned the rhythms for music and drums. And every uniform we had on, our mama made our uniform. There is something to be said about the Jackson family structure that produced the world's greatest family entertainment against the odds. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you've found this session as stimulating as I have. And to bring the session to a formal close, I want to introduce the next winner of the Spingarn Award and the chairman of the board of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Mr. Julian Bond.
I'm joined on the stage here by Vice Chair Brock, and some of you don't know Leon Russell, but many of you do. I know you know him from the resolutions process, but if that's all you know about him, then you don't know him. Because I'm telling you, of all the people you see up here on the stage, this is the only one without whom this just wouldn't be happening. You wouldn't be there. This is the man, Leon Russell, Vice Chair Brock, Eugene Duffy, Chair of the Special Contribution Fund Board of Trustees, and everybody knows Hazel Dukes, our hostess who brought us here. The most important member of the Jealous family, Miss Lisa Epperson, and her husband, Benjamin Todd Jealous, and Vice Chair Brock and us, on behalf of the group of people standing behind us, and on behalf of all of you, and on behalf of all the people who will say, gee, I can't imagine I missed this. As we will say in the future and tell people what we saw, I want to thank these people for doing what they did and coming here tonight. People, we've been sitting backstage congratulating ourselves, saying this is the best thing we ever did. And it is. And you made it the best thing we ever did. I'm thinking about all the conventions I've been to, all the presentations we've had, all of the sessions we've had. This just topped it. This is the cream and the salsa. And so we want to thank you all. And because people are by nature selfish, we want to ask you to keep your seats for a minute or two so we can have our pictures taken with you. So if you will. And I want to do one other thing. I didn't know I was going to do it. I read a story in the Los Angeles Times a few weeks ago about a young girl, high school girl in Los Angeles, who was homeless. She and her mother and her sister and her little brother lived in a container. But she knew she was smart. And she said to herself, I can get out of this. And without prolonging this, she graduated in 2009 with the highest honors. She was an Ephebian, highest honor bestowed on a graduating senior, 4th out of 281, 2.82 GPA, 3.82 GPA, #1 African American student, superintendent honor roll, Principal's Achievement Award, Best Attitude Award, Gates Millennium Scholars finalist, USC Presidential Scholar, USC Gross Scholar, Columbia Presidential Scholar finalist, Questbridge Scholar finalist, USA Fund Scholarship Program Finalist Award, UCLA Higher Ed Scholar, one of 12 chosen, South Central Scholar, UCLA Motorboard Scholar, completed 20 credits at Los Angeles City College while in high school with a 3.75 GPA. I was so excited about this, I asked her to join us here, and she agreed, even though she's now attending a special program at Cornell University, hold on, to prepare her for her entry this fall into Harvard University. And I just want to ask, oh, here she is. She's going to be sitting here one day. I just want you to meet Kalijah Williams.
Wow. 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 I don't know what to say. I'm just so honored to be here, to actually be able to sit here and see all these amazing people who are like leaders in the African American community and in America. And this is just such a great experience, and I'm just so glad to be here. And I thank you, Ms. for inviting me to this. And wow, and I'm so honored, and thank you for making this all possible, and thank you for all that you've done, NAACP, everyone on stage, and thank you so much. I'm going about Friday night.